Hello gathered friends, I'm Hrur Nuva and welcome back to BIONICLE Deep Dive, where we analyze the tropes, characters, and lore of LEGO BIONICLE. Happy BIONICLE Day everybody! One of the most prevalent and profound themes throughout BIONICLE that I really love is the theme of passing on hope for the future. Many times throughout the story, what the heroes are fighting for isn't just about achieving a final victory for themselves, but also ensuring that there continues to be hope for their people, and laying the groundwork for future heroes to pick up where they left off. As such, the victory at the end of the story isn't just the product of one hero or even one set of heroes, but it's a victory that's been built up by generations of heroes all doing their part to create a better tomorrow. And no team embodied this more than the Toa Metru, particularly during their struggles as the Toa Hordika. So today, I'm going to be analyzing that theme and showing how the hope they fought for laid the foundation for all the heroes that came after them. Let's dive right into it. In my video for BIONICLE Day last year, I talked about how the theme of time permeated the entire Toa Metru arc, particularly how 2004 really gave BIONICLE a sense of place within time, that its world had a rich past and also has a potential future as well. And the 2005 Hordika arc is what crystallized that the future is what the Toa Metru were fighting for. For much of the early part of the 2004 arc, we don't really get to know exactly what the Toa Metru's mission was, what their true destiny was going to be. All that was deliberately kept mysterious until the movie, where we see the Great Cataclysm and ultimately their decision to evacuate the city to the new island of Motunui. They passed on the power they were given by Lekon to reawaken the Matoran, and with their destiny ultimately being to have kept the Matoran out of Makuta's clutches, ensuring there would still be hope for the Matoran to eventually return to their home. So, while the theme of passing hope to tomorrow is present at the end of the 2004 story, it gets explored even deeper in the Hordika arc. All of this happened because Makuta cast Motunui into endless sleep, but they didn't try to restore the city and reawaken him all by themselves. There is a moment when sailing back to Motunui where Whenua wonders aloud that they could have stayed and tried to rebuild rather than relocate, but when the Toa actually reach the shores of the city, we are confronted with just how impossible that would have actually been. The damage was too extensive, and as shown with the Visorak, the threat of Makuta and his minions was far from over. And after being captured and mutated, the Toa Hordika spend most of the middle section of this arc gathering airship materials to evacuate the Matoran. This shift in mindset from trying to return the city to how it was in the past to trying to preserve the future is really poignant. The mission to resurrect the Great Spirit was carried out in parts by 3 Toa teams, with each team having a vital role. The Toa Metru evacuated the Matoran of Motunui out from the Matoran universe to ensure they would be safe until the arrival of the Toa Mata, who would eventually bring them home. Among those Matoran would be the Toa Hordika, who would save Motunui from death and thereby clearing the way for the Toa Mata to return and ultimately reawaken him. The Toa Metru could have never accomplished all of that on their own. None of the teams could have. But by doing their part and keeping hope alive, they made it possible for future heroes to do their parts. And there's an interesting humility in having their destiny being a small part in something much larger than themselves. Oftentimes in stories with heroes chosen for destinies, the destiny is meant to be grand and final, the ultimate saving of the day. And that's even the case with the other 2 main Toa teams, whose destinies were to resurrect and reawaken Motunui, grand climactic accomplishments in their own right. But the story treats the Toa Metru's destiny of saving the Matoran to ensure hope for the future as just as vital a destiny. The theme of passing hope to the future is also present in one of the side stories in the arc, where the Rahaga task the Toa Hordika of finding the Mask of Light, which they hid in the city. Back when the Rahaga were Toa Haga, they discovered that the Brotherhood of Makuta had betrayed their oath to protect the Matoran, were raising an army for conquest, and captured the Mask of Light. Hoping to defeat them, the Haga launched a raid on the Brotherhood fortress, and actually succeeded in defeating Makuta Pterodax and stealing the Mask of Light. But stealing the Mask of Light from the Makuta came at an immense cost. While they thought they had beaten the Brotherhood, Makuta's servant Rudaka captured and mutated them. They managed to escape with the mask and hid it in Metru Nui. But despite their best efforts, they couldn't stop the Makuta all on their own. But they were able to pass along hope by saving the Toa Hordika and passing along the Mask of Light to them. The Toa Metru then brought it with them to Motunui, where it would eventually be found by Takua, who would become the Toa of Light and the hero that would return the Matoran to Metru Nui. Hope passed from one generation to the next, each laying the groundwork for it eventually to pay off. Now, there's some in the fandom who argue that BIONICLE shouldn't have continued the Toa Metru story in 2005, that their story was complete in 2004 and BIONICLE should have gone back to the present, perhaps even having the Toa Nuva face the Vizirac when they returned to Metru Nui. And I'll admit, I do think that could have made for an interesting story. But I also truly believe that continuing the story of the Toa Metru through the Hordika arc was extremely necessary for BIONICLE's story. Rescuing the sleeping Matoran and getting them to Motunui was their destiny, and fleshing out the struggles and ordeals they went through to fulfill it made their story far more poignant. The challenges they faced as Hordika really drove home how much they sacrificed to protect hope for the future. It's what makes that theme work. Because, more than anything, the struggles of the Toa Hordika showed better than any other saga just how hard it is to keep hope. The Hordika arc is one of the darker and seemingly hopeless arcs in BIONICLE, alleviated only by the fact that we knew it was a flashback and that the Matoran would eventually be brought to Motunui. The Toa Hordika were up against a seemingly insurmountable threat with the Vizirac, a horde of cunning and ruthless conquerors who had already taken the city and beaten the Toa once. They spent the entirety of the arc pursued and on the run, even more so than they did in the previous arc. They had to face this threat while their very minds and bodies were turned against them. Mutated against their will, their bodies became twisted and bestial, hitting all of them hard, but particularly Matau. Even worse, the mind-altering effects of the Hordika venom. It made them less rational, more prone to anger and violence, and they had trouble maintaining their focus for cognitive tasks. What's worse is that the disease only progressed more with time. They knew that if they didn't find a cure soon, they would be rendered feral, destructive beasts permanently. And if that happened, the Matoran would be lost forever, and no one would even remember what the Toa Hordika fought for. They had to do it in the shattered ruins of their beloved home, racked with guilt that they were powerless to stop the cataclysm, and that their absence allowed the Vizirac to conquer the city. Although the cataclysm wasn't their fault, and there was nothing they could have done to stop it, the guilt and grief at all they had lost weighed on them. They had to do it while their very faith in their destiny was broken, having discovered that it was Makuta who selected them to be Toa in order to divert destiny. Which is why I think it was so important that they did not discover the truth that they were in fact chosen by Motunui until after they had already won and rescued the Matoran. Learning they were always destined didn't help them succeed. They succeeded in spite of the fact that they believed they were chosen wrong. And above all, they had to do it while their team and their trust in each other was more fractured than it had ever been. Vakama's betrayal, more than anything, was him succumbing to despair. It's incredibly easy to fall into despair when isolated, and the rift that formed between him and the other Toa drove him deeper into his Hordika side, quicker than any of the others. Combined with his immense guilt over his own failures, and the revelation that Likan was tricked into picking him as a Toa, this led him to lose faith in himself, and his faith even in the idea of being a Toa. In Challenge of the Hordika, Vakama laments that it seems all the Toa do is destroy, that they didn't save anyone. And the novelization for Web of Shadows, Vakama's fall to the dark side is further expanded upon. There it shows that not only was he driven by his anger at his team, but was also rationalizing his betrayal because he believed their mission was hopeless. He told himself that if he could gain command of the Vizirac, he might be able to order the Matoran freed, believing there was no other way. Vakama gave up hope on his team being able to succeed, and that allowed him to be drawn down a dark path that wouldn't have succeeded anyways, given the Vizirac served Makuta. Ultimately, what brought Vakama back was Matau choosing to reach out, choosing to believe in Vakama and try to get Vakama to believe in them again. Their connection brought Vakama out of his despair and brought back into perspective what they were fighting for. That connection brought back their hope, which in turn saved the hope for the Matoran. Throughout this arc, it's made abundantly clear how close they came to losing everything. Their destiny was to keep hope alive for the next generation. They had to fight tooth and nail to just barely succeed alive. A challenge that justifies their destiny being just as grand as any of the other flashier ones. It's also what puts the heroes of the future in their debt. The Toa Nuva could have never succeeded without the Toa Metru, as without the Metru, the Matoran of Metru Nui and likely the entire universe would have long been under Makuta's control. And there's a scene in the epilogue of Web of the Visorak that really encapsulates this debt on a personal level. Vakama was telling the tale of how the Toa Metru got captured to Tahu, and when he finished, he feared that Tahu would think less of him for his mistakes. But instead, Tahu, in one of the gentlest moments for his character in the entire series, merely grasps Vakama's hand and acknowledges all he went through to reach the shores of Motunui. And in keeping with the theme of the relationship between past and future generations of Toa, in Time Trap, Vakama receives a vision of the future, his clearest vision ever, where Toa Kukua talks to him from the future. Kukua tells him two things. The first is that Vakama must be willing to destroy the future he fought so hard to save in order to keep hope alive, which ultimately comes to pass in the climax of the story, where Vakama threatens to destroy the Mask of Time and unravel time itself to keep Makuta from obtaining it. It was the only leverage he had, and he couldn't bluff. Makuta obtaining the ultimate power of the Mask of Time would extinguish all hope forever. And so, to ensure that at least some hope existed for the future, Vakama threatened the very concept of the future itself. The second thing Kukua tells him is that one day 6 heroes will go on a perilous journey, and that Vakama will have to bear the most terrible burden of all. And while Vakama initially believes that means he will have to lead them, Kukua reveals his role will be even harder, that he will have to send them on this journey knowing there's nothing he can do but wait and hope. And this speaks to the theme of passing hope to the future by showing one of the hardest aspects of it, the sacrifice of having to trust the next generation, knowing you won't be there to help them. Likon couldn't save the Matoran himself, and he knew it. So he passed his power and along with it, the hope to the Toa Metru. And the Toa Metru knew they couldn't save the city themselves, so they saved the Matoran, brought them to a new home, and kept their spirits alive so that the hope would stay alive with them on the island, long enough for new generations of heroes to take up the torch and finish the mission. The immense sacrifice of the heroes of the past ends up adding stakes to the mission of the heroes in the present when the flashback saga ends. The Toa Nuva aren't just fighting to save their people now, they're also fighting to ensure that the struggles of the heroes that came before them were not in vain. In a way, all the main Toa we see in the story had the same greater destiny, each one doing their piece of the mission, then passing hope along to the next generation in a cosmic relay race. Also, when looking at their role in the larger destiny and Motunui's plan to ensure they became his heroes, it really becomes clear how vital the Toa Metru were to everything, especially when you think about how they were the only team in the history of the Matoran universe we know for sure were handpicked by Motunui himself, and definitely the only ones Motunui went out of his way to ensure became Toa. The Toa Metru's destiny is notable among the main 3 Toa teams in that it is the only one that Makuta did not use to further his grand plan. For the other 2 teams, Motunui's death and revival, and later his reawakening, were vital parts of his plan that he purposely manipulated to give himself ultimate power. He wanted them to happen, just in his own controlled way. The Toa Metru's destiny, on the other hand, was not something Makuta accounted for at all. It was not something he planned around. By rescuing the Matoran, the Toa Metru flat out beat him and forced him to change his plans. All the more fitting considering that Makuta believed he had already defied destiny by being the one who made them Toa, not knowing he himself had been manipulated by Motunui into doing so. In Time Trap, Makuta taunted Vakama by saying that they have not stopped his plans, that at most they've managed to delay them. Unbeknownst to him, it was that act of delaying that allowed them to foster the next generations. The time brought them hope. And it is the hope that the Toa Metru kept alive that eventually saved the day and brought the Bionicle characters to their happy ending. By bringing the Matoran to Motunui did more than just keep them out of Makuta's clutches. Their time on the island forged them into a people willing to stand for themselves against the darkness. And that ended up being the real thing that saved them. Because while the quest to reawaken the Great Spirit ended in disaster, with Makuta taking over the universe, their continued resistance through the Reign of Shadows and the Battle of Barra Magna helped win them a new world to call home, now truly free to become fully fledged people outside their role in the Motunui robot. Also, I must say there's something fitting about how Motunui's plan for them was to have them leave with the hope of eventually coming back and fixing their world, because that is what his mission was from the Great Beings. Motunui himself, and by extension the whole journey of everyone in the Matoran universe, was the hope being passed down to tomorrow. The hope of the Great Beings that their creation would one day return, wise enough to heal their planet and fix their mistakes. But more than anything, I find this theme so poignant because it gives me hope for the future in the real world. I'm not gonna lie, we live in scary, dangerous times right now. Climate change, the killing of innocent people, massive inequality and bigotry. The weight of the world's problems can be paralyzing. It can feel like we won't be able to solve all the world's problems in our time. And the truth is, we can't. We won't be able to solve all the world's problems within our lifetimes. No generation ever has or ever will. But we are not alone. Not in this time, nor across time. What good we have in the world now is the result of those in generations past fighting with everything they had to make life better than it was in their time. They laid the groundwork for those of us now in the present to continue pushing forward. We can't fix everything in one fell swoop, but there are concrete steps we can take right now that can improve the lives of those around us and create a foundation for further progress to be made. Remember, isolation leads to despair. Reach out among the people you know, in your friends and families and local communities. Find ways you can help and find ways to be helped, even if it seems small. We fight so that one day those that come after us will have new daunting problems to face rather than being stuck with the same old struggles we feel. And they will make progress on those new struggles, progress that will keep the hope for the generations that come after them. We come together, we do what we can, and we work towards a greater goal: unity, duty, and destiny. That's something BIONICLE taught me. And, some may say it's childish to draw hope for the real world from a fictional toy line, and there is something to be said about looking at the world too heavily through the lens of fiction. But at the end of the day, this is exactly what stories are meant to do. Since our own time before time, humans have told and retold stories to inspire and teach and pass hope to the next generation. And the wisdom of this sentiment is found in real-world philosophy and religion, perhaps most poignantly in a quote attributed to Rabbi Tarfon. Quote, "It is not your duty to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." End quote. And so, this lesson BIONICLE had about passing hope to the future keeps me grounded and determined in these troubling times. So thank you, and take care, my gathered friends.